He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
This is Mediawatch. I'm Colin Peacock. What to do about the dangers of online harm was aired in a parliamentary inquiry this week with a focus on the welfare of younger people. That's an issue that's prompted 2 proposed new laws and fired up lobby groups demanding tougher restrictions and also others opposing them in order to protect free speech. And it's generated a fair amount of media coverage lately too. But what will the inquiry actually change, or was the intention not to change that much at all? But before that, one issue that's fired up some in the online world lately is the drama at the top of New Zealand netball. Now, netball's a national sport and our most popular female one by far, so it's natural that the media would want to know if something's going wrong. But are the media making the game's current coaching drama worse at the worst possible time?
As a result, we are confirming interim coach appointments in there. And that is because despite everyone's best efforts to reach resolution in terms of the concerns in the Silver Ferns high performance environment, we've been unable to do that.
That was Netball New Zealand's Chief Executive Jenny Wiley on News Talk ZB's weekend sports show last weekend, which was looking ahead to the Constellation Cup games against Australia this week. The 14-strong Silver Fern squad had just been named. But almost all of that chat was about the off-court stuff, which meant the coach, Dame Nolene Taurua, had been sidelined for the series and the upcoming Northern Tour as well. And that prompted ZB host Jason Pine to ask this.
What are those concerns?
Oh, look, I think they are part of a confidential employment matter, and what we're doing is respecting everyone in that process. But as we've said, we have concerns around the Silver Ferns high performance environment and working through those.
Unspecified concerns among some people about unnamed others doesn't give the media, or the fans for that matter, much to go on. And after 10 minutes of that on the air, Jason Pine talked to New Zealand Netball Players Association head Steph Bond.
Look, we know that there's been a lot of conversations that have happened over the last couple of months. So the fact that they haven't reached a resolution is surprising to us. But I think our immediate reaction is it's just really incredibly sad and difficult for everyone concerned at the moment.
Well, after 5 more minutes with her, the concern was clear, but not among whom or about what exactly. And when Jason Pine opened up the talkback lines on ZB, the first caller told him he needn't have bothered.
Felt sorry for you. I was absolutely irate hearing her. She read that from a notebook in front of her or from a lawyer's script. She did more damage for New Zealand Netball coming on with you for that 10 minutes than had she not have come on to talk.
But in response, Jason Pine told that irate guy he didn't expect Netball New Zealand's Jenny Wiley to really be candid.
It's an employment matter, right? It's an employment matter, and often this happens in the corporate world. There are concerns raised, complaints made about somebody in a position of authority, a manager, and in this case a coach, and while that investigation is seen through, it is the person who the concerns are raised about who is stood down.
And during his show, the calls kept coming from mostly disgruntled men.
I hope like hell they don't try and blackmail her and say, you before we pay you, you've got to sign this confidential agreement that you won't talk about it.
Yeah, that's not John. That's not blackmail. That's common as a non-disclosure agreement. That's not blackmail. But I get the feeling, mate, that is exactly what will happen. That's very common in the corporate world. I get the feeling that's exactly what will happen here.
And the intensity of all that startled Jason Pine a little.
I think we'll leave it there. I think we should get on to some brighter matters. Thank you for all your calls and correspondence. I have never seen the News Talk ZB text machine blow up like it has. Even when we give away tickets, we don't get this many texts.
The next day on News Talk ZB, the Mike Hosking breakfast picked up the ball and ran with it and picked the brain of a regular guest on the show with some high-level corporate experience.
It's a difficult one. I mean, obviously there's a lot of legal issues going on there, and there's people who are silenced and can't say what they...
Should there be?
Well, I mean, I don't think I've tried to sort of follow it from the outside, just as a fan and as a curiosity, but I can't work out what the actual problem actually is at the core, and no one's talking about it.
Prime Minister Christopher Luxon there. Sometimes employees don't like their boss, he said, and he wasn't alone in not knowing what the actual problem really was. Though, as we've heard, plenty of people were still talking about it a lot out loud in the media.
Mike, this netball thing is being treated like it's a major news story. Do you, hand on heart, honestly believe the greater population of New Zealand really cares about all of this?
And the host's opinion was it really is a story because netball is a national sport and Dame Nolene Taurua is no ordinary coach.
And it interests me that a person who has that level of standing can be treated so badly for such a sustained period of time with nothing conclusive at the end of it.
But to be sure of that, you'd have to know what it was that prompted the standoff in the first place and why. And if Mike Hosking did know, he wasn't saying so on the air. And Dame Nolene Taurua herself was only communicating in statements like this one aired by One News.
In a statement released to One News via Dame Nolene's lawyer, it clearly states Taurua's desire is to resume as head coach of the Silver Ferns and, quote, any lack of agreement has not been the result of unwillingness on her part to find solutions.
Now, so far, only one party to all this has spoken out clearly on the record in the media in over a month, and that's star shooter Grace Mweke, who raised sports editors' eyebrows when she told Sky Sport this.
Knowles, if you're listening, we love you and we miss you and we want you back here. You've done so much for this group and the work you've done this whole year. You deserve to be here and we want you back, Knowles. So thank you. Thank you to everyone for supporting us regardless.
Meanwhile, other Silver Ferns players have been criticised by former players, coaches and fans for not saying anything, even in podcasts from across the Tasman.
Why was it only a few of you?
And why did it go on
2, 3,
for so
5,
long?
7, don't really care. There's a massive squad between what happened in January to now. There's a few people that have come through that system. Why only a few?
So what do we really know about what might have gone wrong? Well, RNZ's Bridget Tunnicliffe reported that 2 players were understood to have approached the New Zealand Netball Players Association way back in January on behalf of a larger group of players who were concerned about Dame Nolene's leadership and style. And on social media, something of a witch hunt developed after that, with fans swapping rumours of names of players they reckoned might be the ones who pressured Netball New Zealand and sidelined Dame Nolene Taurua.
News Talk ZB Sports Silver Ferns Vice-Captain Kelly Jackson is calling for social media speculation to stop regarding the ongoing dispute between coach Dame Nolene Taurua and Netball New Zealand. Fans have issued outraged posts online directed at the governing body and players who allegedly expressed discontent.
The only way out of this is for people on the outside just to respect everyone in the situation, including Netball New Zealand, including Knowles, including the players.
One who copped it was Maya Wilson, who recently made herself unavailable for internationals after 10 years as a Silver Fern. And last week, she told the Pacifica Issues podcast Mandate the keyboard warriors had come after her.
If you're going to call me a bitch, because that's what they did, they're like, what a bitch. I was like, I'm going to come and see what you look like. And it's literally, they have one photo that's from 2018 and it's not even of their face. It's of like some mixed like Chiefs All Blacks jersey. Like we sign up to make ourselves available to be a part of the national women's team in a leading sport within this country. But do you want to, here's my bib. You want to have a go and see how easy it is? Because yes, you have all these coach couches and keyboard warriors, but like, do you never see what actually happens behind the scenes? You actually have never stood anywhere near a court to try and see what it's like.
The mainstream news media haven't pointed fingers quite like that, but the intensity of the coverage has only grown the longer the dispute has remained unresolved. And on Thursday, News Talk ZB even rang around netball's major sponsors, including ZB's own owner, NZME.
ANZ, lead sponsor for 17 years and counting, declined to be interviewed but says they're committed to backing New Zealand's largest female participation sport. Waste Management say they remain committed to supporting NNZ through this time and are proud to stand alongside the Silver Ferns. Woolworths, NZME and Somerset retirement villages declined to comment, while Chemist Warehouse and Suzuki were radio silent.
Professor Tony Bruce has studied media coverage of women's sport for longer and in greater depth than anyone else here in New Zealand, and with her University of Auckland colleague Margaret Henley, she's now researching the role of netball in the cultural life of New Zealand for a major study. And in an article for Newsroom, which was published back in January, Professor Bruce said that netball might be a role model for the online appreciation of sport.
If you're not sure, head along to a game or browse the Silver Ferns Facebook site to get a feel for what a caring fan environment looks, sounds and feels like.
While many women in sport attracted what researchers called unregulated cyber hate on the likes of Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube and X, Tony Bruce said that fans of the Silver Ferns and the ANZ Premiership here turn those ideas on their head. But just a few months later, has the Dame Nolene Taurua affair shown that that's not necessarily so, or has the attention of the news media on this made it worse?
Netball has always fought and struggled to get mainstream media coverage. I find it interesting that the explosion of interest happens to be around something controversial. But definitely, from my analysis of netball, it's certainly the level of public interest and the way in which people are engaging in it is quite different.
Interesting, listening to Jason Pine and his weekend sports show on ZB, almost all the people were calling in were blokes, quite wound up about what was happening and upset about Netball New Zealand or Dame Nolene or whatever. Does it surprise you that they would be a bit more wound up than others?
I'm actually not surprised that it was predominantly male, because often on Talkback it's mostly men. Often on Talkback it is strongly expressed opinions. And the research we've been doing with netball fans since 2018 is that if they're critical of what's going on, they don't make that visible publicly. So, for example, the Silver Ferns Facebook page, which seems to be the largest space where people go publicly, they won't make critical comments. The focus there is of supporting the team, supporting the players, supporting the game. They do have very intense opinions, but they tend to express those in closed sites like WhatsApp family groups and things like that, because overall they have a deep, deep investment in protecting the game.
So if you looked at the Silver Ferns fan pages on, say, Facebook right now, would we not see angst and anger about what's happening here, or it gets moderated out somehow?
From the length of time we've been looking at this is quite unusual because there is a lot of critical comment. Criticism of Netball New Zealand, and the vast bulk of that came after Netball New Zealand posted its first press release. And the pushback on that has just been incredible. So what I'm thinking is that most of the fans are protective of the game, the players, the coaches, and the referees. And they have expected Netball New Zealand to be protective of the game. The vast majority of the comments have been critical of the organisation. And I think that's because they feel like Netball New Zealand is letting down netball itself.
There's legitimate public interest in, how people are treated in the sport and the fairness and the likelihood of success and all that stuff. But national sports bodies are also employers and businesses. So what, in your mind, are news media really entitled to know about, say, in this instance, what's gone on with the coach and the players?
News media has a responsibility not to speculate. The current brouhaha is related to the fact that there's an absence of knowledge, that nobody really knows what's going on, and Netball New Zealand won't say what's going on.
Well, partly they're saying that because, they say it's an employment matter, which it genuinely is. And interestingly, even news media companies will say that when they're in the news about the cuts to shows and something, they will say we can't possibly comment because it's an employment matter. So do you think it is actually in the public interest that the New Zealand public finds out via the media what Dame Nolene Taurua did or didn't do that might have alienated the players, or even which are the ones, that complained and led to her being sidelined? Is that legitimately public interest? Because presumably it's all going to come out at some point.
I think it will come out. And hopefully sooner rather than later, because people are certainly getting themselves worked up about the lack of knowledge and trying to fill that gap with all kinds of speculation. But again, you're right, there are legal aspects that have to be taken into account. What people are upset about is why hasn't it been resolved already? None of us have any information. And people are doing all kinds of speculation. Like when Grace Nweke stood up during the press conference at the end of the third match against South Africa, it was really interesting, the comments where people were trying to read the body language of the other players to try to figure out, who were the ones that had made the complaint against Nolene, or who supported Nolene and who didn't. So there's just this huge absence of information. And I think news media, like Dana Johansson's story was fantastic. She really gave really good background and insight into what was happening and sort of gave people something to hang on to. So news media can do a really good job in terms of saying, these are all the things we know. These are the things we don't know, and these are the things that we can't speculate about.
But for example, Maya Wilson, we heard it earlier in the program, she spoke on a podcast, and she said she's been abused. Does that go against what you're saying here, that somehow netball fans are a bit more protective and self-policing, or if care and so on is tested, do netball fans react in the same sort of way as others online?
I have not actually had a chance to analyse the comments that Maya faced specifically, but you've said that, there are increasing numbers of men who want to have a say. I would suspect that some of the more critical stuff might be coming from male fans or men who are commenting on netball sites, because all our data shows that a lot of the most critical comments are made by men or made by people who aren't from New Zealand. I would need to go in and have a look to see exactly who was making those comments.
Yeah, so when you said in January in that piece you wrote, netball fans show the way, you're saying that the fandom emphasises the emotional well-being of everyone involved, just quoting from you here, including players, coaches, their families, as well as fans, umpires and opponents. How do you know this to be true? Is it by analysing all the comments and just not finding anything that's nasty about anyone?
Oh no, there's definitely nasty stuff currently, that's for sure. And there are people who make quite critical comments. So part of our research was we've been going to netball games and we sit with the fans and we talk to fans about why they're there. And one of the things we've found is that if people start yelling out critical comments loudly, you go to a men's game and there's a lot of abuse of the referees or the players. The only 2 times we've seen that was 2 groups of young men who had been drinking. The women who were around them just did nothing. You just kind of could feel them physically and mentally pulling back from these people. So even though these guys were acting in a way that didn't fit with this sort of netball ethos, they didn't criticise them. They didn't take them on. They just left them to do their thing. So there is a sense the game itself needs to be protected, and then that actually means referees as well, or umpires as they're called in netball. So I have never heard anybody yell anything at an umpire at a live game.
So in terms of people's comments to news media and social media, that public-facing stuff, are netball fans more passive?
Oh no, they're passionate. They're absolutely passionate. There's not a lot of passivity in there, but they understand, or there is a sort of culture that the game needs to be protected. So on the closed sites where you have to be a member to join, there is definite moderation, but there's also kind of engagement between fans trying to establish this is how we roll in terms of how we engage in terms of netball. And I haven't seen that so much in some other sports, especially the top male sports.
Have you detected any resentment at the news media? Because this story's been running for weeks now, with so little to go on, and media might be somehow making this worse with this focus.
People who are netball fans think that this needs to be out in the public. They think Netball New Zealand needs to be held to account. And it's a definite shift from when it first sort of broke, there was some criticism of the players, but fairly quickly that shifted to Netball New Zealand.
So this is a huge story right now and has been for a month or so. But along with your University of Auckland colleague Margaret Henley, you've been doing a major study into netball's contribution to our cultural life. This is going right back into the history of the sport. So big picture, is this going to be a moment that is part of the century plus history of the sport that when it's looked back on in the future, people will remember this moment?
At the moment, we're in the middle of the mess. And, voices coming from all directions and everybody being upset and concerned and worried.
And lawyers involved.
Yes, exactly. So I think this should never have been a major issue in the first place. But the way it's been handled and the length of time that it's taken has allowed comment and concern and criticism to kind of rush into the void. So it would be really sad if this became one of the big stories of netball. And it's very sad that it's happened right after the netball centenary, which was all about the celebration of netball and its longevity and the way the game had developed and how important it is to women in New Zealand.
And finally, you've looked in so much depth at the way women's sport has been covered or not by news media over the years. Are you actually heartened in a way that maybe, although it's difficult and awkward and not great for the sport as things stand, that mainstream news media organisations are pursuing this?
Yeah, I think the media have been doing a pretty good job of covering the situation and doing their job properly, not speculating, to try to understand what's happening. So netball's at risk a little bit in terms of media coverage because of the rise of women's national teams in rugby, cricket and football, because those sports are now associated with the men's organisations, and they actually have access to resources and money and support.
Yeah, we know that the ANZ Premiership, it's been a struggle to get sponsors and broadcast coverage and so on for that, which is a shame for what is a national sport with 100 years of history behind it.
Netball's previous dominance is definitely under threat by the way that women's sport is expanding and developing at the moment.
That was Professor Tony Bruce from the University of Auckland's Faculty of Education and Social Work, New Zealand's leading expert on the media coverage of women in sport. And as we heard there, she's currently investigating netball's impact on New Zealand's cultural life in a major study backed by the Marsden Fund. Another issue that inflamed passions this week was the damage to Winston Peters' window after a protest outside his house, for which one young actor was held to account in the media.
Listen, very quickly,
have you... glad to hear that most of you feel that way.
Yeah, just pull your head in on this action, man. It's inappropriate.
Acacia O'Connor was even scrubbed from a telco's TV ads over that because it was reported that she'd given out Winston Peters' address live on Instagram to encourage others to turn up to that protest. This week I looked at that here on Midweek Mediawatch, our weekly catch-up on nights on RNZ National every Wednesday. But on Thursday it turned out that Acacia O'Connor told TVNZ's Breakfast she actually didn't give out Winston Peters' address.
In my live, I said that come down to Swift Ave, which also isn't his address. He lives on a different street to that. I won't say it, of course.
Also on Midweek Media Watch this week, we talked about a key appointment at RNZ and the departure of two long-serving stalwarts, the death of Police 10/7's founder and scourge of scumbag crims everywhere, Graham Bell, and cuts to the funding of two key Māori news and current affairs TV shows. And in a week when there was also a fair bit of bad language about in the media, there was more of it in a new reality TV show all about Aussies suffering in the South Island.
That was hard work, but I'm here now, so that was good.
I stuffed up and she absolutely covered my ass.
That's all in this week's Midweek Media Watch. If you missed it on air, head to our podcast feed. Last weekend here on Media Watch, we mentioned how Patrick Gower, on his TV show Paddy Gower Has Issues, made a strident call for an online safety commissioner with the power to punish tech companies whose creations can harm young people, a bit like the commissioner they have in Australia.
There is some very evil shit out there, and we need to keep our kids as safe as we can. And at the moment, we are not even trying. We need someone to lead on this, someone who can advise the government, talk to us about what's going on, and take action. New Zealand needs an online safety commissioner now.
Now that would require a change in the law here, but what would a commissioner like that do for us anyway?
Just this month, she's gone after deepfake porn websites, threatening a $50 million fine against one company, and she's gone after sex chatbot companies, so they have to make sure that users are over 16. She also started a global network of online safety regulators, which includes the UK, France, Korea, even Fiji. We are only there as an observer.
So why don't we have one?
For 3 years, the Department of Internal Affairs led a project called the Safer Online Services and Media Platform, set up to overhaul outdated regulation to reduce online harm. But in 2024, Internal Affairs Minister Brooke Van Velden scrapped it.
Well, Patrick Gower was right about that. The Internal Affairs Minister Brooke Van Velden told Mediawatch this at that time.
I have made a decision
that we will not be progressing with one regulator for all online material and platforms, which was to try and regulate harmful information or harmful content or anything that could cause loss of emotional, mental or social well-being, so broad and so subjective that it started to lend itself towards hate speech laws, which this government does not wish to progress.
But even before Brooke Van Velden scrapped the idea of a one-stop shop to regulate the digital media, the plan wasn't going anywhere fast anyway, just like previous efforts to bring our pre-internet regulation of digital era media into the 21st century. But the technology has changed a lot since then. As Patrick Gower showed on his show last week, young people are using AI for advice and even companionship, and unscrupulous operators are now using it to deceive people. And as Patrick Gower illustrated pretty explicitly last week on his show, anybody can now use AI to make fake but disturbingly convincing nude images of anybody else, or even themselves.
That's fully clothed. So we can select which clothing to remove.
Gonna go all the way, are you?
That is a girl.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm nude, but I'm nude as a woman.
Now, that had already been demonstrated graphically in Parliament back in May when ACT MP Laura McClure displayed fake naked images of herself to show just how easily this can be done. Now, coincidentally, this week, ACT's Laura McClure was also making the case for her bill again to Parliament's Education and Workforce Committee in hearings as part of an inquiry into online harm.
And we know that we need to do more in the space around potentially regulating. But what we could do is actually go for something really simple right now that would actually make a difference. And that is to say that actually deep faking people without their consent into pornography is illegal.
And that parliamentary inquiry was held at the urging of Laura McClure's ACT party, though ACT itself has actually opposed other proposals to regulate the online realm further. For example, the Australian-style restrictions that Cecilia Robinson's B416 group is calling for, and also a fair amount of the public, according to this on RNZ's Morning Report the very same day.
Well, a new survey out this morning has found almost 3/4 of New Zealand adults support a social media ban for under 14s. The findings are all part of a wider report from Ipsos, its annual education monitor, which asks adults in 30 countries about their attitudes to education and young people's lives.
It was back in May that ACT MP Parmjit Palmer requested an inquiry with terms of reference to reflect ACT's concerns about all this, the need for a clearer definition of the problem, the benefits as well as the harms of online activity, and the proportionality, efficacy and severity of the restrictions, and also the cost effectiveness, the level of intrusiveness and the coercion that any restrictions might involve. But what prompted those worries for ACT? Well, partly the general libertarian philosophy of the party itself, but also its senior coalition partner National being keen to copy Australia's ban on social media for under 16s, due to come into force there by the end of this year. Now, also in May, National's MP Catherine Wedd had put forward her own bill for restricting social media to over 16s here, and the Prime Minister personally backed it at the time.
This bill is about protecting children from online harm, including bullying, addiction and exposure to inappropriate content. It puts the onus on social media companies to verify that someone is over the age of 16 before they access social media platforms. And it mirrors the approach taken in Australia and follows work in other countries like the UK, the EU and Canada.
So at that time, the question was asked, why wasn't a bigger hitter in Christopher Luxon's cabinet backing this bill and punching it through Parliament? Well, it turned out that it's partly because his soon-to-be deputy didn't agree.
For every problem, there's a solution that is simple, neat and wrong. Just slapping on a ban, hastily drafted, won't solve the real problem.
And it was at that time that ACT asked for this parliamentary committee inquiry that had its first hearing last month and resumed again last Monday. And this time, there were representatives of TikTok and Meta in the room. Well, virtually at least. So, what actually happened when all this was aired in Parliament last Monday? Well, the first guests were from the UK, where an online safety law was recently passed, and not without opposition. The UK's Free Speech Union told the inquiry you'd have to firewall the entire country like China to really make this work here. One of the main objections to the social media ban in Australia was the difficulty of verifying teenagers' ages. Easier said than done, said the critics, and it could also end up a de facto verification system for everyone over 16 as well. Now, in the Herald, B416's Cecilia Robinson reckoned that the independent government-sponsored trial in Australia had proved it can be done.
It's the kind of evidence we've been waiting for, and it should be a catalyst for change here in New Zealand.
And another of the guests at Monday's Parliamentary inquiry was the project director of that age assurance technology trial, Tony Allen.
None of the age assurance systems will deliver a 100% result. None of them are completely infallible. But then you also go back for more than probably nearly 100 years or more than 100 years or so, it's been illegal to sell tobacco to children in New Zealand. That has had a massive impact on reducing the number of children that start smoking.
When asked if teens could beat the ban with the help of an adult in the room, Tony Allen made a booze comparison.
And technology will not solve collusion. Technology, if you've got a colluding parent who is prepared to effectively work with their child to enable them to access something that's age restricted, that is no different than that parent buying them a crate of booze and taking them down to the park and say, enjoy this with your mates.
And among those telling the inquiry that social media bans would do more harm than good was the public policy lead for Australia and New Zealand for TikTok, Ella Woods-Joyce, who's based in Australia and not New Zealand. And when asked if she'd let her own kids on TikTok when they turned 13, she said this.
I would allow them to use TikTok, but that acknowledges that we have tools and systems in place that are responsive to the needs of a 13-year-old, which is discreetly separate from the needs of an 18-year-old.
The committee's chair, Carl Bates MP, told Ella Woods-Joyce that primary schoolers in his electorate had been telling him how often they use TikTok. We're always investing in getting better, she replied. And then Labour's Reuben Davidson MP pointed out that just last month RNZ put TikTok to the test by setting up 4 teenage accounts on 4 phones, and TikTok's Ella Woods-Joyce told the committee this.
They looked for but could not find overtly harmful content on our platform. And in fact, when they were searching for it, not only did they not find it, they were also redirected to services that offered support, for example. So in that sense, it absolutely shows that our systems are working well and as intended, acknowledging that there's always more work to be done.
Now, that story about TikTok use was by RNZ's in-depth reporter Kate Newton, who told us this week that working well wasn't quite the full story about her story.
There are 2 things to say. The first is that the main exercise that we did, we weren't actually searching for anything. We weren't typing in search terms and trying to find harmful content. I was watching what came up on the For You page and scrolling through that. And that part of the exercise, I didn't see anything explicitly harmful, no violent or sexually explicit content. But then after talking to a teenager who had been through an eating disorder and also self-harming, she basically told me some search terms that she had used to access that content. And to verify what she was saying, I did my own searches. And when I did that, immediately there was content related to self-harm that came up. It wasn't showing self-harm, but it was talking about all sorts of things around self-harm. And I wouldn't categorise any of what I saw really as recovery content, which TikTok has mentioned. It does allow people talking about their mental health issues that they've been through and that sort of thing. When I then searched a further term that was a bit more obvious, at that point, it came up with an interstitial full page saying, asking if I needed help or if somebody I knew needed help and directing me to a couple of helplines within New Zealand. But I closed the app, reopened it, and immediately the For You page that you do just get passively shown that had more of that content sprinkled in.
One other thing that Ella Joyce Woods said, she noted and wanted to tell the committee that your story only focused on their platform. She wanted to make that point as if you were picking them out.
Yeah, so the reason that I chose TikTok as the platform to conduct this on is, A, because its audience skews very young compared to a lot of social media. I think YouTube is the only platform globally where the overall audience is, or the greatest number of young people are on there, and TikTok is next.
And it'd be the fastest growing one among young users too.
Yeah, I mean, it's just exploded since it launched in the US and other countries in 2016. And the other reason that we chose it is newer, so it's been through less scrutiny. There have been investigations elsewhere in the world into other social media platforms and the kinds of content that show up there. And also, very importantly, talking to parents and older people. We felt that TikTok was the one that was least understood, the one that parents had, I guess, the most concerns around, simply because they mostly aren't on there and don't really understand what's going on and the types of content that might be coming up.
RNZ's in-depth reporter Kate Newton there, and you can read her article, 4 Phones, 3 Weeks, Everything We Saw on Teen TikTok at rnz.co.nz. Just look for the in-depth section. Now, after questions for TikTok, the Regional Director of Policy for Facebook's owner Meta, Mia Garlick, also based in Australia rather than here, told the committee that Meta put under 16s in private accounts by default and restricted content and time of use. And there was no need, she said, to ban it. But the chief legal advisor at New Zealand's main online safety agency, NetSafe, also said children would inevitably find a way to circumvent any legislated bans and end up on other unregulated websites. Meanwhile, NetSafe's former chief, Martin Cocker, was also a submitter to the inquiry, and he bluntly told the committee this.
We can regulate and we can push the big tech companies, but are we going to push them harder than Europe is? Are we going to push them harder than America, than Australia? No, we're not. So our regulatory efforts are not going to have the same impact. Get them behind those partner countries and say, yeah, we totally endorse what they're doing. So let's spend our time thinking about how it is that we help New Zealanders make the most out of those platforms, or what it is that we need for New Zealand on top of that.
So while all previous attempts to regulate the internet have effectively foundered, will this inquiry, instigated by a party in government opposing extended regulation, really make any difference? I asked Martin Cocker, now the director of a charitable outfit called Online Safety Exchange.
The best example is probably Australia, partly because it's so close and accessible to us. They've set up a series of codes tech companies expected to follow, and then they have penalties that they can enforce on top of those codes. But just picking up those codes, if we just picked them up exactly as they are and started using those as the basis for how we expect tech companies to act, we'd be a lot further forward than we are now, and it wouldn't be that unreasonable for the tech companies because they've got to do it for Australia, which is a bigger market than us.
Well, what we seem to have settled on is we have, for example, ACT MP Laura McClure that appeared before the committee. She wants to create a new law, effectively an adjunct to the Harmful Digital Communications Act, to ban those, those deep fakes, that non-consensual pornographic stuff. The National MP Catherine Weird, with the backing of the Prime Minister, and now the government's adopted that, they want to put forward a law that basically copies Australia's ban on social media for under 16s, broadly speaking. Is that what we're going to be looking at, is like specific changes to the law to address specific things, but not overall regulation of online digital media?
Yeah, I think that is what's going to happen. Because those little things can be moved forward, you can convince people that raising the age of social media access to 16 isn't going to impinge on free speech too badly, so people will let it pass. You can say deep fakes are harmful and add it to the HDC, but you're going to make such small movements forward versus the actual size of the problem. That's not really going to change people's experiences online. If we don't set somebody up to start looking at the big picture and starting to move the whole online safety ecosystem forward and develop policy and develop regulation, then we'll end up with these little bits and pieces of regulation that will feel like progress but won't really change the experience for people online. Political parties and political movements have always wanted to make online safety something which is completely restricted to children, and to divert away from the idea that online safety is actually an issue for everybody. I'm not sure exactly what people's objectives are when they start inquiries or they push things like that, but we can certainly see some themes that have come out over time, and desire from certain political parties and aspects of the community to push for particular outcomes and away from others.
That was Martin Cocker, the director of the charitable organisation Online Safety Exchange. Well, Parliament's Education and Workforce Committee will report the findings from that inquiry into online harm by the end of November. Here at Mediawatch, we'll take a look at those when they're out. That's it for this weekend, though. Thanks for listening, and many thanks to Kate Newton for making the time for us, and also Martin Cocker and Tony Bruce for their insights. If you have any thoughts for us or ideas for us to follow up, do get in touch. Email us, mediawatch@rnz.co.nz. NZ. You'll also find us at Mediawatch NZ on X, and you can even write us an old-fashioned letter and send it to Mediawatch, PO Box 123 Wellington. I'll be back next Wednesday with Midweek Mediawatch. Catch you then. In the meantime, follow Mediawatch and listen on any podcast app to make sure you never miss an episode.